Hollow Knight Silksong has a lot of areas, arguably too many areas for me to do a traditional ranking, so today we're instead going to be doing a tier list. We're going to be ranking every single area in Hollow Knight Silksong on a tier list of S to F tier. And I'll be determining which are my favourites and which aren't, so on and so forth. This is going to be an unscripted video, which I am terrified of doing because I'm not the best at unscripted content, but I hope you guys enjoy. I am Billy S, and these are the Hollow Knight Silksong areas, ranked from S to F. Starting off, we have the Mosslands, which is the opening area of the game that encompasses everything leading up to Bone Bottom, as well as the upper area of Moss Home, where you collect your first ability, your Silk Spear skill. This is a cute area. I love the vibrant greens that are just such a large contrast to the Forgotten Crossroads in Hollow Knight, which was so devoid of color. Here in Silksong, it feels like color is something they really wanted to play with and show that this is a living kingdom, and the Mosslands really gets that off perfectly. The first area, which leads up to the Moss Mother, is just a good tutorial section. There are a lot of simple to defeat enemies, the platforming isn't too difficult. If you do fall down the big hole back to the start, it's kind of funny, and the Moss Mother is a nice finishing touch. You also have the Chapel of the Snail, or the Shaman, which you get to see again in Act 3 later in the game, and you also have the Chapel of the Wanderer, which you can only get through the Wormways, but technically counts as an area of the Mosslands, which is a nice secret to discover. I really like Moss Home up above Bone Bottom as well, because it was a great place to farm rosaries in the early game. I fought all of the pilgrims up there to do a couple quest lines and to just get rosaries so I could buy out the shop in Bone Bottom, and it was pretty satisfying. It's a nice area, it does nothing necessarily wrong or right, it just serves its purpose really well, and for that I think I'm gonna put it in B tier. Next up, we have the Marrow, which is the real opening first level of the game. This is what I would consider to be the real Forgotten Crossroads of Silksong, and it's a lot of fun. I really like the way that you can go so many different directions early on in the Marrow, but you will still end up funneled to that left side where you meet Chakra. You can either take the left path up the giant room, which leads to a vertical shaft that leads up to the progression, or you can head to the right of the large first horizontal room where you eventually find the Flea Caravan sign, and if you head up there, you find the fleas, and thus you get to start their quest line. There are a lot of dark rooms in the Marrow, which introduces the fact that this game does not have a lantern, and you kind of just need to be more aware of where you're jumping, and there can be a lot of moments where the game kind of jump scares you with falling boulders or enemies that maybe you're not expecting, which I wasn't always the biggest fan of. I really like the boss fight against the Bell Beast. I think the Bell Beast is a great second fight in this game. It really teaches you a lot of things, gets you a really nicely situated bell station here, and then the second half of the Marrow is also a lot of fun. You can go upwards to save a flea in a hard to navigate platforming room. You can go to the right, which takes you to all the vertical shafts that lead to where Grindel is locked up. It's also where you get to play the mini-game with the straight pin to get yourself some a tool pouch, I think it was, which I think is a fun little mini-game, a little diversion. And of course, there's a little hint that Bellheart exists with the bottom of the Bellheart Tunnels room, and obviously the pathway into Hunter's March that encourages you to continue the main path and come back later when you're strong enough to defeat the enemy guarding it. And then that final room that leads over to Deep Docks, I like it, it's a fun room. It's got some platforming you can come back to once you get the dash, which I think is really nice, because that will also get you a mask shard if you manage to do that and head into Deep Docks. But overall, I like the Marrow. It even has the secret area where you find the Skull Tyrant, which you can only get to after you learn how to, like, climb walls, etc., which I just think is a nice sort of extra incentive to come back here. I would say this is definitely an A tier area for sure. It's not S tier because I don't think anything necessarily blew me away, but A tier, certainly. Next up, we have Deep Docks, which is an area of two tales. You have the first half that you explore in Act 1, and technically you can get into a little bit of the Act 2 area if you have a simple key, as it will let you get into the door underneath the Forge Daughter vendor, which will allow you to access a couple tougher enemies, but you can't go any further than that until you have the claw line. Deep Docks in the first visit is fun. I really like the room where you're walking through the upper path to try and reach the dash, and you see those hopping enemies, the little kind of like creatures, la criatura, and they start hopping over like the lava rocks, and you realize, oh, I can do that as well. And it's sort of like a way for the game to teach you that as long as you don't just stand still on those sort of like heated surfaces, you can run across them, you can walk across them, you can hop across them, and you'll be completely fine. And I love that that's explained through enemies in the gameplay. It's very Super Metroid. It's the same thing they did when they were teaching you special skills in Super Metroid, and you would find random animals that would teach you how to do the Shine Spark technique, for example. It's really cool. I think the Deep Docks does suffer a little bit from the fact that there is a lot of lava damage, and if you don't purchase the Magma Bell very early on, that you are going to be taking double damage from a lot of different sources here. I also think that the second half of the Deep Docks, which is when you return in Act 2 or Act 3, depending on when you want to explore, is a little bit more brutal than I would like. There are a lot of very annoying enemy placements and positions that I just don't quite enjoy, especially those enemies that have the explosive rocks that do double damage. They are often placed in very tedious locations, but I do like that a lot of the shortcuts in the second area of Deep Docks wrap around to benches in a really fun way, and I think they have one of the more fun fights with the four brothers, Cygnus and Gron. They're a lot of fun, and I think they work really well together. I do like that you can encounter one of them earlier in the Deep Docks as well, which is like a nice little sort of twist on the situation, because I actually thought that this guy was a regular enemy, and I was gonna leave the screen and come back and try and fight him, but then he was just gone, and then he shows up in the boss fight later, and I'm like, whoa! I don't like the room with the giant slugs. I'm just gonna say it, the room with the giant slugs is not fun. I don't think the platforming is that interesting. I don't think the obstacle is that interesting. I think it's very tedious, and I think it promotes just kind of rushing through to try and get to the diving bell, which just isn't my cup of tea. Especially if you do it in Act 3 and the slugs happen to be voided, which is just not fun in any simple case. But overall, I think the Deep Docks is fun. I think it's an interesting area. I think it presents a lot of danger, more so than any of the areas early on in Hollow Knight, and I think it is like a solid, I would say I prefer it to the Mosslands. I think I prefer the Marrow to Deep Docks, but I do think Deep Docks is high B, for sure. Next up, we have the Hunter's March, which is possibly the most controversial area in Silksong, because it is what I would consider to be like an Act 2 area that you can just access in Act 1. Because if you defeat the guard outside of the Hunter's March on the leftmost entrance, then you can explore this area whenever you want, despite the fact that a lot of the enemies are incredibly difficult, and maybe it would be better to wait until you've liberated Bellheart and you've gotten your first nail upgrade. Most people won't know that. And that's the joy of Metroidvanias. You can explore wherever you want, whenever you want, at any point in time. Your difficulty is catered towards you, and most people decided to bash their head against the Hunter's March, and that led to a lot of frustration. It doesn't help that this is also the area that has the first trapped bench in the game, which is funny the first time, but by the time you get to like the third or fourth area in the game later, and there is yet another bench that you cannot immediately access for whatever reason, it can be very, very frustrating. I also think the Hunter's March just doesn't really have much to offer in terms of interesting items. Like, yes, you get the Crest of the Beast, but I would argue that is literally the worst crest in the game and is only useful when you're flea juggling in Fleetopia in Act 3. There's a hidden vendor that you can find in Act 1 who is dead in Act 2 that you can get a tool from, and there are some other rooms that you can explore as well, but nothing that I necessarily found that intriguing. The main reason you want to come here is because in Act 3 you have to go to the Carmelita statue and you have to use the Silk skill to dash upwards and access the rest of the Farfields. So really, Hunter's March just acts as this difficulty spike with tough platforming, tough enemies that I do like, but that I just think maybe I wish there was just more to this area, pretty much. I just think that it's not as interesting as some of the other areas, and like, I thought it would be more fun to explore than it actually was in the early game. So I am gonna put it, I definitely, like, this is my hot take, I actually think it is a good area. I think it's above the Mosslands. I think it's below Deep Docks, so I'm going to put it in B, above Mosslands, below Deep Docks. Next up, we have the Farfields, which is, I would say, this game's fungal wastes. It is a large, vast area with flora and fauna and wind currents that you know you're going to eventually ride up. You have this whole little quest line in the bottom right with the Seamstress where you need to go and kill some enemies, take their spikes so that you can get the cloak needed to progress up to Greymore. You have the really fun battle with the 4th chorus that I really enjoy. I think it's a great time. I think it's one of the better fights in the early game, and I think most people will agree that it's a highlight of the Farfields. You also have the Weave Nest in the bottom right. You have the Mask Shard that you can collect in Act 2 that involves you having to do the enemy gauntlet in the sort of volcano room, and then you have to run up from the lava, which I really enjoyed, but I understand that there are a lot of players like my partner, for example, who just don't vibe with those sorts of challenges, and that's completely okay. It is what it is. The Farfields, though, gets a lot of boost from the fact that it's also a late game area, as you come back here in Act 3 via a different entrance through the Hunter's March, and you get to see even more of like the colonies beyond. You get to go to Skarsinger Carmelita's arena, you get to go and face the really quick guy in the racing mini games, you have the battle against Gur, the outcast. It's really cool, and I really like the mechanic in the second half of Farfields where you have the posts that you can claw line onto, and then they start bending downwards, so you have to kind of like time your jumps in order to not hit the spikes but also still claw line to the next spot. It's really cool. I really like the Farfields. I actually think it is the best area in this game so far, and I'm gonna put it at the top of A tier. Next up, we have Greymore. This is what many would consider to be like the City of Tears of this game, if we really had to keep comparing to Hollow Knight, but honestly, I think Greymore is really well designed. You have the left side of Greymore and the right side of Greymore, which are two very distinct challenges. On the left side, you have the Halfway Hotel, and then you have all of the clock towers and windmill towers that you can climb. You have some of my favorite enemies in this game, the scissor-wielding bugs, who can ascend and descend through platforms. They have a really cool grab attack. They have a really cool sort of like dash attack. They're just so fun to fight. And the crest that you get here, the Crest of the Reaper, is basically designed like those enemies, so I really enjoy that. The boss of this area, Morwing, is really intriguing because you can fight him here in Act 1, where you would normally have the Flea Caravan, or you can fight him outside of the Bellway station in Act 2. I just think that that sort of little distinction is really cool. You have the upper half of the area, which eventually kind of connects to that elevator that goes back down to the Halfway Hotel, which will also eventually lead to Sinner's Road, which is an entirely new area that I didn't discover until I was in Act 2. I think that is insane that there is that area and then Bellheart, and you can basically pick which direction you want to go in order to potentially break into the Citadel. And then over on the right, you've got the Craw Lake, which is incredibly difficult when you first arrive there because you have to deal with all of the flying enemies. And I really think this is where using Hornet's tools comes into its own, because a lot of players will be playing this game like Hollow Knight, where you're just using your sword slices and you're using maybe your silk skills, but using your tools is what really helps with the flying enemies, like the tool where she chucks a spiked trap and then it just extends whenever anything gets close. That one helped me through this area so much, especially the gauntlet in the Craw Lake. And this is important because if you do all of this and then you unlock all of the inflatable bouncy balls, you can bounce all the way up to collect the Threadstorm Silk skill, which is arguably still the best Silk skill in the entire game, despite its nerf. It's that good. We also have the Crawfather fight in Act 3, which is worth doing because it accesses the Craw Post, I think it was called, that you attach to your bell home that just generates rosaries for you and shards for you, which I think is just a really nice sort of passive income to be getting during Act 3. But overall, I think Greymore is just a really cool area. I dig the atmosphere, I dig the vibe, I really like all of the different hidden locations that you can explore, and I love the way it just connects to so many different areas. Bellheart, Sinner's Road, Farfields, Wisp Thicket, Woedenaz, it's just fantastic. And I think this is my first S-tier area. Congratulations! Next up on the list, we have Bellheart, the town in the center of the kingdom surrounded by bells. I really love that moment when you first arrive and you have the cutscene of just all of the inhabitants hung up and strung up by string. It is one of the most ominous sequences in this game by far. And the idea of wrapping back around into the bell tunnels so that you can save these people, collect the needle from Widow, and unlock this town and bring it back to some semblance of normalcy is something I really enjoy. Of all three of the hub locations, I think Bellheart is easily the most welcoming, and it's not just because you get a house there after you do a bunch of the side quests. I don't really like the tunnels though. I'm not gonna lie, I think the tunnels of Bellheart, the above tunnels and the below tunnels, are just really tedious. They're not very fun. I don't like that constantly there are bells falling from the ceiling as this sort of gotcha moment, and the side quest that involves you collecting random silver bells in order to complete it, which will just randomly fall in the tunnels, forcing you to go back and forth between them. It's not fun. It really isn't fun in the slightest, and it absolutely kills this area. I love the hub aspect. I love the characters here. I hate the gameplay of it. I love the boss, Widow is great. I hate the gameplay of going through those tunnels. I hate the spikes. I hate the floors that collapse. I hate the enemies that live there. And because of that, Bellheart, I'm sorry. The hub is amazing, and if it was just the hub, it would probably be in like B tier. But I just don't like the rest of it, so it's going in D tier. Next up, we have the Shellwood, which is the foresty area of Silksong. It's sort of like a swamp, almost, and there's a lot of fun to be had here. I really like the fisher enemies that kind of just like spear the little pond scum insects on the surface of the water. I think they're really cute, and I love that they kind of just do their own thing until you get in the way and they start attacking you. I really like the little side quest with the witch, where you need to collect the polyp pouches for her creepy ritual, and the fact that you can't really do that side quest until you get the wall climb ability towards the end of the area means that you're kind of incentivized to continue exploring first. I really like most of the enemies here. The stick insects are really fun to fight, even if they are very damaging. I think the Sister Splinter boss fight is really cool, even if I would say her flying enemies that accompany her and that also accompany the latter half of the level are a little bit annoying and a little bit difficult to fight. I think the platforming is really where Shellwood comes into its own, because there's a lot of vertical platforming with a lot of like the white flowers, there's a lot of spikes around, you've got to deal with those enemies that are like the white flowers that kind of explode with pollen, you've got the ones that launch out from their stems like baby faces that just make me very uncomfortable. And then you've also got the extra part of the Shellwood up above in Act 3, where you end up fighting Seth, which I just think is a nice little addition to this area. I just think the Shellwood is a really fun area. I think it's got a really cool vibe. I think it's got a really good sort of energy to it. The aesthetics are fun, the enemies are good, and I like running through it. So Shellwood is going to be at the top of A tier, above the Farfields and the Marrow. Next up, we have the Wormways, which is this game's answer to Deep Nest. I don't really care for the Wormways all that much, I'm gonna be honest. I thought it was gonna be more interesting than it was, but it turns out this area is basically here to hide one weave nest that you can only get to later in the game, which will get you a silk skill that allows you to actually kill the worms, and it allows you to talk to Xylotl, the alchemist, who gives you the lifeblood sort of charm. Although I don't remember, what do they call it in this game? They don't call it lifeblood, they call it some plasmium. They call it plasmium. And you kind of just get that tool from them, and then you can use pathways to get back to Mosslands, so you can get the Crest of the Wanderer. That's really it. That's all this area is. It's not that interesting. I don't really enjoy exploring it. There's not too much to necessarily find. And when you come back in Act 3, it's just a bit tedious to explore because all of the enemies have been hopped up with plasmium, which makes them take longer to kill. It's not fun. It's not the worst area in the game. I don't hate it as much as I hate the Bellheart tunnels, for example, but I also would skip the Wormways most of the time if I had the choice in future playthroughs. The only reason I would go through them now is just because it is a potential skip if you want to skip some of the gameplay, if you want to just get the simple key, open the Wormways door, and try and get up to Shellwood and Bellheart that way instead of going through like deep docks in the Farfields. Overall, it's got to be C tier for me. Next up here, we have Weave Nest Atler, which you can access the moment you get the needle in from Bellheart. You head back down into the Mosslands, and you play the needle in front of the Weave Nest door. This is a very quick area. It's not very big, so I'm not going to go too in-depth, but I like all of the little challenges it presents. You've got Eva, who is an awesome character who can upgrade your Hunter's Crest as well as give you extra tool slots, which I will never complain about. You have got a Mask Shard you can get here, you've got a Spool Shard you can get here, you've got a rematch against 2 Moss Mothers that you can fight here for a tool, there's also a Moss Spitter that you can find as well, there is the trap piece that is needed at the end of Act 2 in order to get to Act 3, which I think is really cool. Overall, Weave Nest Atler is just like very interesting to me, because I came here first out of all the weave nests, and I kind of expected that the other weave nests in Silksong would be of a similar variation. So kind of finding out that Atler is actually the biggest one and all of the other ones are basically like just single rooms pretty much was a little bit disappointing, but it kind of makes Atler stand out kind of on its own in that sense. I would say this is like high C. There's not really much here to excite me or make me think, oh, this is an area I absolutely adore. But at the same time, I also can't really hate it. And actually, you know what? No, in that case, low B. Low B. Underneath the Mosslands, but like, it's in B tier. Alright, Sinner's Road. This is the next one. This is gonna be very simple. I don't like Sinner's Road. I don't. I'm sorry. I tried to be contrarian for a little bit because I generally like the swamp levels in FromSoft games. I genuinely do like Blighttown, I genuinely do like Farron Keep, I genuinely do like Caelid, etc, etc. But Sinner's Road, I'm sorry, it is just such a difficulty spike, and it drove me up the walls on my first playthrough, and honestly on my second playthrough too. The main problem are the roaches, who are very tanky, and if they grab you, that's 2 masks of damage that you couldn't really stop, and they fucking hurt. I don't like them. They're rude, they're annoying, they're irritating, and there are so many of them because they keep breeding. They need to stop breeding. I do like that the Sinner's Road gives us access to the Green Prince NPC, who is one of my favorites in the game, as well as the two dudes in their house, kind of in the upper right corner of this area. There's also disgraced Chef Lagoli, if we're looking for a boss fight in Act 2, which is kind of a fun reason to come back. But this is also another area that introduces a bench that you have to kind of do a challenge in order to complete. It is a fairly difficult platforming challenge that I think a lot of players are going to struggle with, and I think it's very cruel because Sinner's Road is already a very difficult difficulty spike in comparison to what we've been through before. So forcing people to kind of do a really tough platforming challenge on top of all of the stuff you had to do to even get to the bench room, I don't know, it's not really my cup of tea. I understand what they were going for, it just necessarily didn't land for me. I do think that the latter half of Sinner's Road is better than the first half, though. I do like the big horizontal room that kind of leads all the way to the right. You can encounter Garmond here, actually, and he'll permanently kill one of the big guys if you're lucky enough to find him here. And obviously there is both a path into the mist and into Bile water that, like, most people wouldn't see because they're behind breakable walls, which I find a bit ballsy, but also very cool. You also get Styx, the NPC, who will create those little noodly creatures for you that allow you to suck back up your silk from wherever you are, which is very nice. And you do get a simple key here, which I have to rate because simple keys are very rare in this game. But Sinner's Road overall, it's not for me. It's not for me. It is C tier. I would put it above the Wormways because I think it just has more substance than the Wormways, but I don't love it. Alright, this is it, guys. We're talking about Bile water next. This is the most triggering area in the game for a lot of players, and I am so conflicted because on the one hand, I actually really like the design of the area. I like the fact that the maggoty water is evil. I like the fact that it makes sense with the lore. I like the fact that you have to do a lot of platforming in this zone. I like the music. The music is gorgeous. Oh my god, the music is fantastic in Bile water. I don't understand why an area that has caused so much vitriol has such beautiful soundtrack. However, the enemies in this area and the overall checkpoint distribution in this area are so awful that this is going to make people stop playing this game. If my partner wasn't playing this game for me to watch him playing it, he would have stopped in Bile water. He gave the controller to me and basically said, you do the Groll fight, because he didn't want to do the run back because he found it that bad. And I think a large portion of that is that there are traps everywhere, there is poison water that is going to fuck up your silk, the enemies are constantly hopping away from you and throwing shit at you from afar, which just isn't fun to deal with. And if you don't discover the hidden bench on the way to Groll, then you are constantly having to run through the entire area from the Bellway station at the very start, which I just think is unfair. Combine that with yet another fake bench that will just drop you into a pit of disgusting muck, and I can't defend Bile water. I think it has merit, but I think this is where Team Cherry took the difficulty and just like cranked it up so far to 11 that they started to alienate a lot of players. And that's okay. Developers are allowed to do that if it is with their directorial vision. But that also means that they have to be prepared for a lot of players to be like, I'm sorry, this sucks. But no, Bile water, I'm sorry, you're going in F tier. You might end up being the only area in F tier, but I can't justify you being anywhere else on this list. Next up, we have the Mist, which is the optional area between Bile water, Sinner's Road, and the Citadel. You can get to it from two different directions. In my first playthrough, I got there through Bile water. In my second playthrough, I went through Sinner's Road. And I'm not the biggest fan of this area, I'm not gonna lie to you. I think the Lost Woods style, you have to figure out the correct way to leave each screen so that you can progress, is okay. I don't mind those types of puzzles, What I do mind is that there really is no indication that you need to play the needle in order to make the flies fly in the direction of the doorways that you need to go through. I did need help from my chat during my first playthrough because I just genuinely didn't understand what to do or where to go or anything of that sense. There was just nothing in the game, there's nothing in any other area that would hint at this, not like, I don't know, like a book in Bellheart or something along those lines that would be like, oh, in the mist you can use it. There's nothing to even hint at that. You really kind of just have to have the intuitiveness to play the needle in, and I just don't have that intuitiveness, so I'm very grateful for my chat to help me there. I also think the mist is a little bit annoying because, one, if you make any mistake in the platforming and fall through the mist, you end up right back at the start. There are no benches that are necessarily super nearby for you to deal with, so you kind of have to make sure you get through on your first go around. And then the wraiths, oh god, the wraiths. I don't mind them sometimes, but when they are in positions where you need to get past them and they're very awkwardly placed, and they have that thing where they'll do the dash, but sometimes they'll track you in a weird way and catch you in your jump when you feel like they shouldn't, it can get very frustrating. I like the mist in concept. I think as an area though, it kind of misses the mark. And I think in that case, it has to go in D underneath Bellheart. Next up, we have the Blasted Steps, which is one of the last major areas of Act 1. It is one of my favourite areas in Act 1 as well, which I didn't expect to say after I went through it the first time. Because, oh my god, getting double damaged by the bug pits that you would fall into before the first patch came along and changed that was nightmare-inducing. The judge enemies felt really difficult to fight at first until I watched my partner play through the game and just find really easy ways around them. I really like that the pilgrims you find in this area are kind of like upgraded from the ones that you fought before in the game, where like you have the old guy but he's got like the nail that he uses as a rapier and he's all jolly and happy and he's like wah 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 wah. I love that. That's really fun. I really like the platforming in this area as well. I think it's really well done. I think most of the rooms have really cool shortcuts that allow you to kind of like get back through the rooms really quickly. There are a lot of hidden tunnels that you can kind of explore. There's an optional fight with the great conch flies, which leads over to the pinstress, and that means you get an extra bit of damage because you get your nail art, which is just really exciting. Needle art, I should say, which is really cool. And then you have the last judge room. The last judge room, which just... oh, that room kills my enthusiasm a little bit. I do not like running back through that room. I am good at running back through that room now. That doesn't mean I have to like it, and that doesn't mean that I have to enjoy it. I have shared my thoughts on that boss run back in my part 3 of my Silksong boss ranking video, which you can see in the top right corner and in the description below. But basically, it comes down to, I feel like that room is just needlessly brutal as a boss run back. I think it's really fair if it's just a normal area room that you're exploring and you get through and maybe there's a bench at the other side or whatever, that would be fine. But as a run back, it is not very fun to go through. Especially when you still don't have all of your movement tools. Once you have all the Act 2 movement tools and you have to come back through this room every now and then for various reasons, it's very easy to get through. There's not a lot of trouble, but in that very first moment in Act 1, it can become a real sticking point for a lot of players, and I have to point that out. Overall, I think this area is gonna go, for me, because I really like the ambiance, I like the energy, I like the sort of like the wind that is constantly blowing you away and in various directions. I actually do think it is going in A tier. It's going to go above Farfields and below the Shellwood. I really do like the Blasted Steps, but I don't think I can put it any higher than that. I think Shellwood and Greymore are just a little bit more interesting to me, and they don't elicit so much rage. Next up, quick area, it's the Grand Gate. This is a couple of rooms. There's really nothing to it. Honestly, I wouldn't even consider it an area, except it does have its own map. You have the really cool parkour with the scales that you can do later in the game, which gets you to a silk spool. You have the elevator that will drop you into the Underworks, and the elevator shaft, which leads into the Shellwood area where you fight Seth, but honestly, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. This is very much like, it's not an F tier area because I don't hate it. I don't feel anything for it, so it's going to go at the bottom of D tier underneath the Mist and Bellheart, and I think we're just going to move on from there. Next up, we have the Underworks, which is the first area of Act 2, and I have such a love-hate relationship with the Underworks. On my second playthrough, I didn't find it as frustrating as my first. I knew how to avoid traps, I knew how to fight enemies, I knew my route in order to get out of there very quickly, but I just think back to my first playthrough and how annoyed I was with the Underworks, with the sort of capitalist nature of you needing to pay for benches, of there being a confession booth that you can pay that will just tell you the same thing over and over and over that you can waste your money on, that the enemies do multiple masks of damage, and that if you don't have any rosaries coming into this area from Act 1, you can't even sit at any of the benches, you just have to go through the area on your own from start to finish, which I had to do on my first playthrough, and I was miserable. I was miserable. This, in my opinion, is a really bad way to start Act 2 for certain types of players, because it just puts you in a negative headspace. The second half of the Underworks, when you return and you get the claw line, I actually really enjoy. I think it's a lot more fun. I kind of like that it plays with the idea of being very similar to the Deep Docks area. That being said, even then, this isn't one of my favorite areas to come back to. I really don't find myself thinking about Silksong and going, oh, I want to go to the Underworks. In fact, one of my favorite moments in the Underworks isn't from any of the mandatory story progression, it's actually from the one flea that you have to come in from the Wisp thicket to get to, and you go through the room with the various rectangular saws that are kind of rotating in various directions, and you kind of have to deal with 4 different setups of those. That's really fun. I liked that. I didn't really like anything else in the Underworks. I think it's better than the Wormways. I think I would prefer it to Sinner's Road, but at the same time, the way it makes me feel, the way it made me feel in my playthrough, was so negative that even if that was the intention, because obviously the whole point of the lore of this area is that all of the workers are underpaid, overworked, and it's meant to be a shithole. But I still don't find that fun to play through. And when it's something you have to get through if you go through the Grand Gate entrance into Act 2 in order to get back to the rest of the game and actually enjoy yourself, then that's where I have a problem. And because of that, I'm sorry, the Underworks is going in F tier with Bile Water. It's going above Bile Water, because Bile Water pissed me off a bit more, but the Underworks, I'm sorry, for the way it made me feel in my first playthrough, even if future playthroughs are fine, I just can't help thinking that so many people I've seen just don't enjoy this area on their first run, and that to me is the sign of an area that I just don't think is very well designed. Going from one of the worst areas in the game to one of the best areas in the game, Coral Chambers is next, which is the main sort of hub of the Citadel where everything else branches off from. The music here is gorgeous. The sheer size of this area is massive, with so many vertical rooms with various different pathways to go off and explore. You can rescue Grindel in the upper left, you can collect a piece of the Cog Heart with a Simon Says style challenge, you can find the kitchens and access the Great Tastes of Farloom wish if you really want to try and go for that pale oil. You have to explore various horizontal rooms in the bottom bottom half, fighting against pilgrims, avoiding lace, and just generally like having a good time. When you get that Bellway station and you also get the Ventrica and you realize that, this is like kind of its own area and it's massive, but it's really well designed and there's so many different directions you can go in and there's always something to find around every corner. It's just, Coral Chambers is really good to explore. I love the various platforming challenges, I love bouncing on the bells, I love in the leftmost side with the platforms that extend and retract back in that you have to kind of like time your jumps to. I like that there are a bunch of hidden collectibles, you've got like a really cool flea that you need to find here, you've got a bunch of different fun set pieces to interact with, like the giant circular tunnel that serves no real purpose aside from looking cool, but it looks really cool. And you also get the first shrine here, which is one of your major hub areas of the game. In fact, it's probably the most important hub area of the game, because it's where you're going to be accessing Act 2, it's where you're going to be bringing a lot of the pilgrims, including Sherma, to your group, and then it kind of all ends off with the path leading to the Cogwork Dancers. And while technically the Cogwork Dancers are part of the Cogwork core, they are also the end boss of the Coral Chambers, so I kind of include them as a bit of both. And I just love that once you defeat that boss and you can access the left side of that area, that kind of everything just wraps in on itself and the Coral Chambers just becomes this intricate maze that you can explore at your own leisure. And there are so many different places to go from here: Cogwork Core, Whispering Vaults, White Ward, Slab, Memoriam, High Halls. It's just, it's extremely well designed. This is the true City of Tears of Silksong, and it is S tier. Is it better than Greymore or worse than Greymore? I think it's better than Greymore. I think it is just extremely well designed, and I think it's a brilliant location that fully deserves all of the praise it gets. Next up, we have the Cogwork Core, which is the platforming area of this game. It is basically this version's White Palace. Not Path of Pain, not that hard, but I really like that you have to do a little bit of platforming at first so you can access the Whispering Vaults, and then you have to do a little bit more platforming after you get the Claw Line, which will allow you to get to the top half of Cogwork Core and do some really cool platforming that is really inspired, really fun, really well designed. It really has you thinking about how to use the Claw Line, and if you decide to go to Mount Fae before you do the Cogwork Core, obviously you've got the double jump as well, which can really help too. It's just a really fun location that tests you on an aspect that other areas in Silksong don't do as much. Obviously, platforming is very prevalent in Silksong, but when this specifically is just a pure platforming area designed to get you to one of the 3 songs you need to access the end of the game, then I just have to really respect it. Also, it has one of the best music tracks in the game. It is an absolute banger, and you know what, Cogwork Core? Congratulations, you're our 3rd one in S tier. It's going to be underneath Greymore and the Coral Chambers, because I do think that Greymore and the Coral Chambers just have a lot more going on, but Cogwork Core completely deserves its S tier. Next up, we have the Whispering Vaults, which is the area you get to from the Cogwork Core and the Coral Chambers, which ultimately leads to a boss fight against Trobbio. The Whispering Vaults is interesting. I like the concept of the puzzles here, which are the moving blocks that you kind of have to hit with your needle to shift them to the left, to the right, up and down. I really like that some of the rooms really lean into that puzzle style, like the one before the pale oil in the Pinstress layer, where you kind of have to really work your way through this maze of boxes. I think that is so much fun. It also has one of the tougher platforming challenges in the path that leads up to where you fight Garmond and Zaza, where if you fail one of the platforming challenges, you drop all the way into Bile water, which I think is a very brutal and a little bit needlessly cruel sort of punishment. It does do the thing where it drops rocks on you way too much in this little platforming segment, but hey ho, it is an optional thing. Most players don't need to do it. It is what it is. I really like just kind of exploring the main areas here in the Whispering Vaults and dealing with the sort of like the creepy little sermon guys that crawl along the floor and skitter around that you have to kill. And obviously Trobbio is a fantastic boss. Trobbio is great. I love Trobbio. He's amazing. Whether it's in Act 2 or Act 3, he very deservedly gets to be the ruler of the Whispering Vaults, and I can't fault him for that. I do think this area isn't as interesting overall as like my S tiers, but I definitely think it's either A or B. I think because it's not terribly memorable, I'm gonna pop it at the top of B tier above Deep Docks, because I think I would enjoy going through it more than I would going through Deep Docks, but at the same time, I don't think it's like a top tier area for me. It doesn't stand out in that way. Unlike our next entry, White Ward, which is a very short area in the Citadel, but it tells a really unique and interesting story. This is where the game decides we are going to become a horror title and you are going to deal with it. Now, I'm not the biggest, fan of the enemy design here. It's not like that the enemies are bad or anything, it's just that they don't really do much for me. The big scissor guys don't do much at all. I really like the sort of spirits that are kind of wrapped and possessed by silk. They're a lot of fun. And obviously, I'm not the biggest fan of the Unraveled boss, but I can respect the creepy factor of it when you drop into this silk, discarded dreg heap, and then you're forced to fight what is the equivalent of, an amalgamation of ghosts. It's basically a spiritomb. But the fact you can go through this area without actually even encountering or fighting the boss, because the actual way out that will take you to the Underworks is just through a furnace, is a little bit disappointing, because it kind of leaves White Ward feeling incomplete. I'm glad that we get to come back here to do the Sherma questline, because it kind of gives it a little bit more to do. But overall, I think White Ward, I think it goes at the top of B. I think it goes above the Whispering Vaults, because I really like the energy of this area, but it just needs a bit more substance in certain things, in certain aspects. I really like the way that it plays with cinematics, especially with sort of how you're in the vent in the start of the area and you look out and you can kind of see an item hanging and you can hear noises in the background. It's very creepy. But the ambiance can only take an area so far in this game. Next up, we have the Slab, which is the prison area of Silksong. Now, I did not experience the Slab like most people did, because I was able to kill the cage flies every time I encountered them, which meant Hornet never got arrested for me. I never got to see her snap someone's neck with her thighs, and I am devastated that I never got that experience. But it is very cool. However, if you go to the putrefied ducts and you collect a key from a dead cagefly, you are able to access the Slab despite not getting arrested, and I think it's a really fun area. I really like the concept of a lot of the enemy gauntlets using the buttons that trigger traps so that, you can fight a lot of the enemies here without actually using your weapons, because that was kind of how it was supposed to go if you get captured. You kind of have to figure your way out of all of these situations without any of your equipment, and I think that's really fun. Coming here with your equipment though, it's not as difficult. It is obviously a much easier experience, but I love that there is so much hidden in this prison that you wouldn't expect. There is a mask shard, there is the fight against Broodmother that you can unlock later in the game, as you collect more and more keys, which is very Prison of Hope, very Demon Souls of You, Silksong developers, Team Cherry, I see that. You can then go into the very depths of the prison, and if you're observant, you can fight the first Sinner, who is one of the best fights in the game, and I find it insane that she is hidden behind this very obscure tiny hole in a ceiling that most people are going to miss. I think the Slab overall really nails the atmosphere and the energy that it's going for. It is definitely an A tier area, I just don't know where in A it's going. I think I would put it above the Marrow and below the Farfields. But A tier is a very comfortable spot for this area. Mount Fae is next, and I really love Mount Fae. I think it's basically a big Celeste homage, with the idea that you need to climb this mountain in order to progress the story and get your double jump, and there's a chance that you might get to the top of the mountain and whatever's waiting there might just kill you instead, but then it turns out to just be a really cute fluffy bird moth thing, and it's adorable and I love it. But what I really like about Mount Fae is that it is so unapologetically about its platforming and its difficulty. It really forces you to get good at using the claw line, so that when you get the double jump, it feels so freeing when you're going through this area with all of your movement tools unlocked. I really like the sort of sporadic nature of the checkpoints, which kind of makes it so that every time you find a warm spot so you don't freeze to death, you kind of like, oh my god, thank god I found it. I really like, though, that for observant players, there are a lot of benches that you can actually use to keep yourself safe. And while there are some sequences that I would say are very difficult, for example, this sequence where you're having to sort of claw line past these enemies and get up this room, I really struggled here for some reason. Overall, I had a lot of fun. Mount Fae for me is easily, and I'm gonna say it, hot take, it is an S tier area. I think it goes underneath Cogwork Core, but it is one of my favorite areas in the game, and it's one I will continue to look forward to in every playthrough. Next up, we have Memoriam, which acts as a memoriam of the civilizations that were taken over before the Citadel came in charge. For example, you see aspects of the Shellwood here, you see aspects of the sands of Karak here, and very soon, you probably were going to see aspects of the Hunter's March here. Basically, this area is made up of the biomes of locations that we visit in Act 3 to collect the old hearts from. And I think that's really interesting, because those kingdoms were dying. Without their rulers, the areas were beginning to disintegrate, the ecosystem was beginning to degrade, and this is the Citadel's way of being like, we're gonna try and make sure that these areas don't go to shit. I kind of like that energy, but at the same time, it's the Citadel's fault that all of those areas kind of started to degrade in the first place, because the Grandmother Silk came in and displaced all of the other monarchs. So in that sense, it's also kind of a very dark area. There's not that much to necessarily find in Memoriam. I think it's a nice splash of color in the Citadel, which is usually very kind of like pale yellows, golden hues. So I kind of enjoy it for that aspect. It also has the encounter with the giant flea, which is absolutely iconic. We love our giant flea boy, so you know what, that kind of gives it a bit of a boost as well. And this area also kind of has the extra hidden area with Jubilana, where you can kind of go out onto the outside rafters, and eventually that leads over to the putrefied ducts if you're really careful and you keep an eye out, which I think is one of the most well-hidden areas in this game from that aspect. But overall, I wouldn't say the Memoriam is like one of my favorite areas. I honestly think it's a little bit of a nothing area overall. I definitely think it would be like B tier or C tier. I think it's gonna go in the very like bottom of B tier above Woedenaz Atler, and I think I'm gonna be very comfortable with that there. Next up, we have the High Halls, which is one of the upper areas of the Citadel. This is a platforming zone where you're climbing up large streams of water by diving over platforms and fighting really cool enemies as you go. I really love the guys who have the floating, rotating cogflies around them. They are incredibly fun, and the fact that you can also craft your own cogflies in this area is also a big bonus. That being said, the mantis guys that kind of like float around and have like the really big swings, they are annoying. I don't really like fighting them. I find them very frustrating. And that one room where you want to get a collectible at the very top, the optional room, and there are two of them, and you have to claw line your way up, but the two of them get in your way, and it's just, I don't like that room, and I don't like those enemies. I also have to point out that the High Halls has a very brutal fight at the end, the Forum fight, which is a 10-stage enemy gauntlet. This does make sense in context because of the 3 songs that you try to collect to continue the story. One of them is from the Cogwork Core, which is like the platforming one. One of them you get in the Whispering Vaults, which you had to defeat Trobio to get the claw line for, so that's kind of like a boss one. And then the High Halls, they wanted to focus on enemy gauntlets because gauntlets were more important and combat was more of a focus in Silksong, so I understand why they did all of this. but it doesn't change the fact that I kind of found that sequence very frustrating. It is cool though that you can get multiple helpers for that fight. You can get Garmond and Zaza if you manage to defeat them in their optional fight in the Whispering Vaults, and you can get Chakra if you complete her quest in Bile Water, and either of them are quite helpful if you're able to pass them from your enemies. But overall, I think the High Halls is a nice blend of platforming and fighting. You also come back here in order to fight the Second Sentinel, which is a fun fight, and you can also break into like the Citadel's treasury in order to get the Rosary Cannon and a bunch of money, which is also quite nice. But overall, the High Halls, beautiful area. I think it's A tier. I do think it is definitely A tier, but I think it's kind of low A tier. I would say it is above the marrow, but below the slab. I like it. I have fun in this area. I find some of the enemies annoying, but overall, like, the positives outweigh the negatives for me, and I can respect what Team Cherry were trying to do here. Next up, we have the Sands of Karak, which can be found in the upper left of the map below Mount Faye. You get here via the Pinstress's house. Once you get the claw line, you're able to climb up the cliffs even further and enter this degraded world. This is a fun area for me. I really enjoy the Sands of Karak because it has a unique platforming gimmick that I really vibed with. You hit these orbs and it will cause trees to craft themselves, so to speak, and you basically have to platform along the platforms, bounce along the bounceable objects, and make your way through the area. The only stuff I didn't really like in the Sands of Karak is like the one room where you have to get the crust nut and you have to just break walls over and over and over again, and you have to do some like really precise platforming while breaking the walls, which is just very tedious and annoying depending on the crest you have equipped. I really like the one flea that you have to collect here in the Sands of Karak, where you kind of have to wrap your way back around with some platforming, and it like feels really rewarding to me to complete. You also get a simple key here atop one of the benches, which I really like, and you get multiple shortcuts that lead back down into the blasted steps, so you've got a lot of different ways that you can actually approach the boss of this area, which is the surviving great conch fly from Act 1. You also have the ability to get into the Vault Nest, which isn't listed as an area in this tier list that I'm using, so I guess people consider it as part of Sands of Karak. And yeah, it's a good little extra area to explore in the Sands of Karak that I kind of like. I also have to give a shout out to the memory of Karak when you go there in Act 3 to fight Crust King Khan. Obviously, we don't get to explore a full area with that beautiful, like, sort of aquatic energy that it gave off, but at the same time, sure, we only get to do enemy gauntlets, but at least we get to experience what is genuinely one of the most beautiful aesthetic areas in the game. Sands of Karak overall, I think, is one of my favorite areas in A tier. I don't think it gets to S tier. I think I prefer it to the Blasted Steps, so I think it's gonna go up there. The only thing I don't like about Sands of Karak is the one fight against the Watcher at the Edge. That one annoys me because there's just not a very good boss run back to get to the Watcher. You kind of have to go through a lot no matter where you come from, and then he can kill you very quickly, which it's just not my cup of tea. Not at all. But overall, the Sands of Karak is a very fun area, very aesthetically pleasing, and I really like it. Next up, we have the Wisp Thicket. This is a hidden area above Greymore that connects to the Underworks, and it is a creepy little zone. There are these firebugs that will self-immolate and also send fiery spirits to kind of homing attack you, which can be very annoying to deal with. But because this area is so short and so small, it's actually not that big of a deal. The boss here, the Father of Flame, is basically a puzzle fight. You just have to do a bunch of platforming and bouncing, and you can eventually kind of destroy this Wicker Man style effigy. I was expecting Nicolas Cage to pop out, quite frankly. The main reason you come to the Wisp Thicket is because there is a mask shard here, and it connects to the Underworks in case you want to get the extra flea. But I really like the aesthetics, I really like the colors here, the sort of dark green and orange hues, I think is like really unique. The lighting is well done, which makes sense because you're playing with an area that is both like lush and filled with vibrancy, but also filled with fire and darkness and all of that, and I just think it works really well. Of these tiny little areas, it is probably the best, but it also isn't like the most exciting in the world, so I'm gonna put it at the top of C, above Sinner's Road. Next up, we have the Cradle, which is the final area of Act 2, where you face down Grandmother Silk at the top of the Citadel. This is an area that doesn't really have much to it when you first arrive. You have the Battle of Lace and the flower field that is absolutely gorgeous. You get to explore and find a little bit of lore depicting all of the various weavers who have been captured by Grandmother Silk over the years. You re-unlock the Terminus area and find out that, oh my god, the Terminus Ventrica was actually where we needed to go all along, that's crazy! And then you have the fun little platforming segment leading up to the Gilf. However, the Cradle truly comes into its own as an area in Act 3, where after you descend it at the very start with everything collapsing and cracking under pressure, you can then return later on after your trip in the Abyss to access a hidden secret platforming segment. You want to come here because you want to succeed and complete the Mr. Mushroom questline, which can be started over in the Putrefied Ducts past Fleetopia. Basically, you have to climb through a series of platforming challenges where you've got to use your silk skills, you've got to avoid dangerous spiders, little millipedes that you can farm soul from, and this crazy vertical platforming challenge where your clawline skills and your double jump skills and your silk management are going to come into full effect. I didn't do this on stream, I actually only did this part in preparation for this area ranking, and I found this platforming segment to be really fun and really unique. It's a nice little extra challenge at the end of the game. It's not too hard, but it's obviously not too easy either, and as a reward you actually get to chat with Mr. Mushroom, something that never happened back in Hollow Knight because the knight could never speak, whereas here, Hornet has a full-on conversation with him, and I'm like, oh my god, I didn't know this guy could talk! That's crazy, I thought he just rambled on his own, but no, he finds Hornet so important that he's willing to have a conversation with her. And once he blasts off, you head upwards and you discover an abandoned village on the surface of Farloom, untouched by the silk that was shot out by the Grandma. The creatures you find here are just regular bugs, and you can play your needle in to get yourself an extra memento and continue back down to the rest of the Cradle. It's a really cool moment, just getting to get to the very top of the kingdom and you just see that it is desolate and abandoned because everyone was seduced below, down into the depths. You can imagine this might even be where the Weavers came from, because a lot of those spiders that became the Weavers are found on the path upwards. It's just a really interesting location with some fun little tidbits of lore, and I think it's a really nice reward for people going out of their way to try and find these extra things. There's also the Pale Nail Silk skill, I think that's what it's called. I don't think I've ever used it, I literally grabbed it for this footage, but cool that there's a silk skill up here you can grab. I like that. Cradle is not the best area in the world, but I do think of the B-ranked areas, it goes right at the top. It's got just enough of a reward for me to really enjoy it as a lore fan and as someone who just likes a bit of challenge, and I think it just kind of sticks in the mind as this really cool centerpiece and end piece to Silksong's challenges, so. Next up, we have the Putrefied Ducts, which is Bilewater's little brother. It is found in the upper right corner of the map. You can get there by breaking a wall at the east side of Memoriam, and thus you have to deal with some of the most annoying enemies in the game. This area has the mosquitoes, which fire 3 rapid shots, and the tracking will hit you whether you like it or not. There is no way to avoid them. You are going to get hurt, you are going to get hit, you just have to deal with it. There is no choice. Suffer. I really like the enemies that are like plants that will like trap you and start pulling you up towards them, because 1, they're really good just used as traps. But 2, when the game decides to use them also as platforming challenges, I just think it's really smart that they did that. And it kind of brings a little bit of a smile to my face, kind of seeing that the developers thought of that and made some really cool challenges, like how you get to the flea lady, for example. I just think that's really cool. This area also has the Wreath of Purity, which allows you to withstand the maggoty water if you have it equipped, which is very useful. I will always plus that. You also have the quest line, which gets you the long nail or the long needle ability, the long claw ability, which will increase your nail strikes, and all you gotta do is just kill a bunch of enemies with some traps, which I think is the easiest little power-up we've ever obtained in this game, quite frankly. And of course, Fleetopia. Who doesn't love Fleetopia? Fleetopia is a great little side location that I think really needed to happen. I was so concerned that the fleas were just all going to die at the end of this game, similar to how the grubs were eaten by their father in Hollow Knight, but just kind of seeing that the fleas decided to have a festival and do a bunch of mini games instead, I think it was just so wholesome and so cute, and it was just like the perfect way to end that storyline. I don't like the putrefied ducts, I'm gonna be honest. I think they're kind of a bad area. I don't think they're as bad as the Underworks or Bile water though, they don't annoy me like that, but I do think that the mosquito enemies are my least favorite enemy in the game. So for that, it's definitely going in D tier. I think it goes above the Grand Gate, because the Grand Gate is nothing. It goes above the Mist, and I think I'd put it just above Bellheart, because I would rather go through the putrefied ducts than go through the bell tunnels in Bellheart. Next up, we have Verdania, also known as Lost Verdania, which is the kingdom of the Green Prince. You can only truly access this area by going into the Green Prince's memories, and thus it's not a particularly large region, but I like that every room kind of has something to do, because you're basically collecting these memory fragments so that you can unlock the boss fight at the end and face down the Green Prince, and because of that, every room kind of needs these memory fragments in order to progress the story, and thus every room has something to do. Whether it's parkouring over a giant lake with shrines that you need to activate, or hunting down the Pale Stag, which, while not one of the most exciting fights in the game, I think does exactly what it needs to do. It's a fun enough fight, even if it is one of the worst ones. But overall, I think Verdania is just gorgeous. It's lush, it's beautiful, it's a kingdom that I wish we could explore. It's very reminiscent of Greenpath in Hallownest, except obviously it's only in the Green Prince's memory. If anything, it's kind of sad, because obviously you get to the Green Prince and you find his home empty and he's still the only one there. Even in his memory, he can't really conjure his lover or his people. He's just forced to kind of relive all of this in his own mind, and it's so sad. And then Hornet kills him and takes his heart, which I just think is utterly unhinged. Homosexuality isn't that bad, Hornet. You don't need to go that crazy. She even fucking rips him off and is like, ooh, he's being a bit vain in her notes. And I'm like, Hornet, calm down, diva. Calm down, stop with the judgments. Verdania is beautiful. I really like Verdania. It's just a shame that it's an area you can only visit once and then you kind of never get to see again. But it is definitely an A-tier area. I think it goes above the High Halls, and it goes underneath the slab. I think the slab is like slightly better just because it's got more to do, but Verdania is gorgeous, and I think that it certainly deserves its spot here. Next up, we reach the Abyss, the second to last area on this list of Hollow Knight Silksong, And I think everybody was excited when we got to the Abyss, because suddenly it felt like the game was reconnecting with Hollow Knight. We recognized some of the enemies, we then met some of the new horrifying enemies, and we got to have a lot of fun sort of stealthing our way past all of these creatures, going through the tunnels, and making our way down deeper until we reached the lake, where Lace is waiting. I really like that there was a weave nest down here that we had to find to get our final movement ability, and I really liked the escape sequence that you do when you have to get out of the Abyss the first time. It's not for everyone, because again, it is that instinctual platforming sequence that not every player is going to be good at, but for me, it was something I really enjoyed, and I found it to be a real rush trying to get out of the Abyss. I think overall, this is just an area that works really well as both a throwback to Hollow Knight, but also just a reminder that in this world of Hollow Knight, the Abyss is ever present, and no matter the kingdom, it is always there, bubbling underneath the surface, waiting for a chance to surface. And as such, it's gotta go in A tier. I think it goes at the bottom of A tier, because as much as I like the callbacks and everything, it's not necessarily an area I'm desperate to continue exploring when I replay the game, but at the same time, I love what it is from a story perspective, and the fact that at the very end of the game, we end up diving into the lake with the delicate flower from Silksong, and then we come back up, and the Hollow Knight, the Wanderer, the knight from our previous game, comes and saves us at the end. Oh, flawless, fantastic. And finally, we have the Red Memory, the last area in Hollow Knight Silksong. This is the memory that you have to go through in order to get the delicate flower, the Everbloom, needed to complete the game. The Snail Shamans send you in, and we basically get what is one of the best lore drops for Hornet as a character that we have ever seen. We get to parkour through Deep Nest, even revisiting the distant village with the exact same layout that it had during that game. I love the sequence of Hera where her face is visibly distorted because Hornet genuinely cannot recall her face because she was so young when her mother decided to seal herself away. I love seeing her train in the Hive because, as we see when we upgrade her needle in this game, she was trained by the Hive Knights, and we specifically see the Queen herself training with Hornet. It makes sense now why her name is Hornet specifically, because of like the Hive motif. I absolutely love that. And then we move on to the White Palace, where we get a little bit of that White Palace tune. We get to Clawline and Pogo off of those very specific enemies from that level. I remember them. And finally, we ended off with a talk with the White Lady herself as we sort of break the illusion of this just being a memory, and we just straight up start talking to her, even though it's a dream. I really love that moment because they are both celestial beings. They are both powerful, greater, pale beings who can just have this conversation, even if it's just in Hornet's memories, and I think that is just like really special. The Red Memory is brilliant, it's fantastic. It goes at the very bottom of S tier as one of my 5 favorite areas in Hollow Knight Silksong. And that is my tier list. That is all of the areas of Hollow Knight Silksong ranked based on my overall thoughts. Coral Chambers, Greymore, Cogwork Core, Mount Fay, and the Red Memory are my personal favorites, while at the very bottom we've got Putrefied Ducts, Bellheart, the Mist, the Grand Gate, the Underworks, and Bile Water as my least favorite. Do you agree with any of my positions or disagree with them? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button because 50,000 subscribers, we're trying to reach it, and I know we can if you guys help out. I want to give a shout out to my YouTube channel members, by the way, for supporting me for another month. It's $49.99. You get early access to future videos, you get a shout out in the description at the end of videos as well, and you get access to multiple exclusive Let's Plays, including a Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 Soul Level 1 run, and my Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment playthrough. So if you want to support the channel, links are down below. If you want to follow me on social media, I have got a Blue Sky, I've got a Discord, and I've got a Twitch, but I also stream weekly here on YouTube, so you can just come and say hi then. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Adios.